Good evening. I'd like to call to order the December 9th, 2024 work session of the York County School Board. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's school board meeting. We'll begin with a work session and the regular meeting will follow immediately after. Thank you for joining us, and I look forward to productive discussions. To start with, we will have presentations. Our first one is capital projects. Dr. Shander, would you like to introduce our speaker?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Goodwin, and good evening, everyone. We have 4 presentations and I believe 1 discussion topic, so we're going to kick it off with the capital projects report. So I'm going to ask Dr. Carroll, who's our Chief Operations Officer, to provide a summary about current and future capital projects for construction. Dr. Carroll.
Thank you, Dr. Shandor. Mrs. Goodwin, members of the board. So here is your capital projects report. So a pretty brief one tonight, just hitting some projects that we're closing out and some that we're just starting. So first is Bruton High School. We've heard about this. This is a roof project that is contracted to go through till next summer, but we are having really good progress here. So the gym windows and siding have now been installed. Auditorium siding is being installed. And the work, as we've told you before, they're working second shift so as not to disturb any instructional time in the building. And weather permitting, this work will be completed by the end of the month. And so here's a picture of the gymnasium window and siding. This is while the work was being done. And that's the completed work. Here is the auditorium siding. The work being done and that needed extra installation. And there's that completed side. Okay. So that's 3 sides of the auditorium. Okay. And now you can see as we wrap around the building, to the far right, you can see some of that white siding. So that's the existing, and so they're working their way around the building to get this completed. So this is on the auxiliary gym and locker rooms. And here is the, we've talked about auditorium upgrades. So we're starting to do this work, so to do the planning work. So we have anticipated upgrades. We are waiting for the county to approve the funds from the Revenue Stabilization Fund. And so just wanted to fill you in that we're collecting the prices and talking to different firms. Now, we will not go out and hire a general contractor to do this. There may be something that's outside of our scope. Where we go for a small contractor to do a particular job, but we will be hiring individual firms to do this. So the big thing is the stage curtain replacement. Many of these are originals, so we're talking back to the 50s and 60s. Lighting and sound system replacements, and that lighting includes both house and stage lighting. The flooring and seating replacement. And then painting. So these secondary auditoriums should see a really nice refresh and ability to perform any sort of activities they want to in those auditoriums. The next one is the Tabb High School AstroTurf field. So that installation actually is going to start tomorrow. That work will be involving removing existing grass and excavating, and then building the infrastructure and laying the field, and then installing LED lighting. Now, the Grafton High project, we run into some environmental obstacles, and we're trying to work through those. But the Tabb work has a pre-conference meeting tomorrow, and they will start the project tomorrow. So we're glad to reach that day to get this work going.
What's the anticipated finish date?
And that concludes my report. Yes,
What's
sir.
the anticipated finish date for the Tabb?
It all depends on weather.
Yeah.
Now that we're going,
Like roughly.
Yeah, I think it's a 6 to 8 week project.
Okay, so it's like,
And then we just, it would have been nice to have been able to pull it off earlier because we've had months of dry weather.
Yeah.
But we didn't get that, so.
that's the reason for rain.
Yeah.
Question for you, Jim, on the auditorium upgrades.
Mhm.
When, I know we had talked about the stage and the lighting for the SOA Theater. Are they gonna replace the flooring and the seating there?
The seating in there, I don't know about the individual seating, and so I can get you that answer.
Okay.
And on Grafton, that environmental issue, we still don't have the update.
No, we do not.
Question for the Tabb High, the equipment that's coming in for it, where will it be brought in through the student parking lot on the side?
You mean the actual delivery?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would think they would use that loading dock, but a lot of those, it would just depend on the size of the equipment that they're bringing in. Some of the buildings, you have mullions that you can pull, and you've got 2 doors. So it would just depend on where they can bring that in, and that is gonna be summer work, so.
No, I was talking about the field.
Oh, the
AstroTurf.
field, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, there's two exits there, or two points of entry. So they can't go around the back of it because that's the church's property on the right side where the softball field is. But there's a gate where there's no parking, that's where they drive vehicles up there.
Okay.
And they use those for, an ambulance or anything else. So there is an entrance there with a gate. And then on the other side of the tennis courts, there's also an area there that they can get to the gate. So there's two different areas.
And a lot of that's gonna be addressed in the pre-construction.
Okay, I was just concerned with, student parking there, do the students know and it's gonna be marked off, and that will be.
You always mark off any construction.
Does this involve any track repairs or upgrades or just the turf?
No, it's just the turf.
Just turf.
Yeah, we did when we did Bruton's, they had a new track there as well. So I believe they just cut and remove a part of the track for where they'll constantly go back and forth, and then they'll replace it when they're finished.
Any other questions?
Right.
Thank you, Dr. Carroll. All right, next up, we'll discuss the CIP, and I'll take this.
Yep, so the next 3 topics are gonna be the Bill Bowen Show. So we're gonna cover the capital improvements program. As you recall, Dr. Carroll presented to you the facilities master plan over the last couple of months, which ends up becoming the CIP. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Bowen.
Thank you, Dr. Shandor. Ms. Goodwin, members of the board, and Dr. Shandor, I'm pleased to present the superintendent's proposed capital improvements program for fiscal years 2026 through 2031. A copy of the CIP has been provided with you to you this evening. We've also posted it on our website, and it's also posted in board docs and been distributed to the York County libraries. Just a quick review of how the facilities master plan and CIP are developed. The operation team performs an annual review of the enrollment projections and school capacity. The operations staff inspect our facilities annually and review the replacement schedules of our roofs and HVAC systems. Critical issues noted during inspections and reviews often become a priority. The operations and finance team work to align the priorities with the funding that's available. This information is then presented to the county staff at the countywide CIP meetings. And if there's a concern with funding, then Dr. Shandor, myself, and Dr. Carroll will meet with our counterparts with the county to work out and resolve those issues. Now, since Dr. Carroll's presentation November 18th, there is one issue that, one change that we had to the list of projects, and that's with Queens Lake Middle School. For FY30, there was $1 million that actually had been posted there too much in the bond fund, in the bond account, and it exceeded the county's debt capacity. So we had to reduce that bond funding by $1 million. So it was thereby reducing the total project cost from $27.6 million to $26.6 million. Now, because it's so far out, I don't think it's going to have an impact because these numbers are changing every year. So we'll continue to look at that as we move forward for that project. So just a brief overview of the document itself. We'll start here with the elementary school projects. And on the far left-hand side, we see the description of the projects. And then the next column, we see FY25E. Anything that's in FY25E, those projects have been approved, funding for those projects have been approved by the Board of Supervisors. So what we're going to be focusing on this evening are projects from 26 to 31. And there is a public hearing this evening on the CIP and the business meeting following this work session. And so I'm just going to quickly run through those projects again, even though there were no major changes. So in FY26, we'll start the A&E for the Dare Elementary and SBO bus loop and additional parking spaces. And that project should commence in FY27 actual construction. Dare Elementary gym HVAC systems, that A&E will begin in FY27 with the replacement to commence in FY28. And then in Waller Mill, this is a 6 to 8 classroom expansion and some common area adjustments. This the A&E will start in fiscal year 30 and with the actual construction to commence in FY 31 and FY 32. On the middle school projects, as I mentioned, there was an adjustment to Queens Lake. It was in FY 30. We went from 13.1 million to 12.1 million. But the project actually starts in FY 28. We'll work on the expanding parking lot and bus loop. And then A&E for the actual construction will start in 28. And we anticipate this to be a 2-year project. And but generally, we see that construction taking at least 2.5 years. The high school projects, in FY 27, we see the replacement of equipment and controls for HVAC at the high school. And then Grafton High Learning Commons, the A&E will start in FY 31 with the construction to commence in FY 32. Now here we have a number of projects for TAB High School. There's, from 26 to 31, there's 6 separate projects for TAB. The total of those projects are over $39 million. And because of the cost of that, we've had to break those projects out. Now, what we've done, we did meet with the county, and the county was able to narrow that window. We were looking at initially 4 to 5 years for construction, and the real hard construction of the facility itself will now be in 2 to 2.5 years. And so it'll start with the LED light conversion in 26, and then the new gym entrance, and also in 26. Then we'll move to the geothermal conversion and HVAC renovation to the tune of about $18.7 million. And then in 26, we also include the new front entrance with the Kiva and Learning Commons, and then the media center, restrooms, renovations, and painting. And then in 2028, we will conclude TAB with the new metal siding and the roof repairs. And if all goes well and we receive additional funding and we receive some tax credits that we're expecting, it's possible that we could install solar at this school, which will further reduce the cost of our energy consumption at TAB High School. And then in 2031, A&E will start for York High for the bus parking loop and expanded parking, and then also for the annex facility. Now for our modular classrooms, they are funded through our CIP, and you can see we have consistent costs for those across the term of the 6 years. In 2026, we're in year 3 of our replacement of our 800 megahertz radios. We've had funding, and we will have funding for 3 years in reserve, but we have not started that replacement process yet. We're waiting on the county to initiate that replacement cycle. And then in 2028, we have fire alarm refresh at several of our schools to tune $270,000. And then in 2031, we'll start the A&E for our potential preschool spaces. We're looking at 12 preschool classrooms. And so for all of 2026, which we will be focusing on, so although we present a 6-year plan, what the county is actually going to approve is fiscal year 26 only. And so we're looking at a total of $20.1 million with $3 million in cash contributions, and for a total bond contribution of $17.1 million. But over the 6 years, it's $96.9 million with $9.5 million coming from cash reserves and $87.4 million coming from bonds. And that concludes the presentation this evening. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
I'm just looking at like we spend a lot of money on that in process. Are we hiring those companies individually, or are we kind of having one company that we can negotiate for a lot of projects and save some money on those?
Yeah, so there's 2 types of projects. One's our smaller projects. We have an annual contract with them. Actually, we're just finishing that process now with those. Those would be smaller jobs, less than $500,000. Then for big construction projects, it's a 2-part. We go out for bid on the design, and then we go out to bid on the construction. So you'll have architectural firms and you'll have construction firms. And for planning purposes, we just put a percentage of what we think the total project.
That's what I noticed. Now, historically, compared to what we budget and what it was, are we saving or are we kind of like on a line or we go over the budget on those?
Up till 2020, it was pretty good. But since COVID happened, costs have gone up terribly.
So it really will depend moving forward how the economy is. If the economy is good, then costs tend to rise. And competition is really strong. But in my budget outlook, I will address some of those metrics as far as the state economy, and it might give us some insight on what we can expect for construction costs in the near future.
I have a question on the preschools. Is this by law that we have to offer the preschool? Is that from federal or whatever?
Well, we offer, yes, we have,
State, isn't it?
we have special education preschool, which would be, is it Part B? I
Yes.
always forget if it's C or B.
6B.
So, yes, we have, I believe, is it 12, Doctor? 12, yes, so we have 12 preschool programs where we have students, I believe, from ages 3 through 5.
We also service age 2.
Yes. So, yes, those are mandated, they are. Since we're talking about construction and space, we were, yes, COVID was a struggle and a challenge, but quite honestly, when we went to the devices, we were able to solve some of our space problem at the elementary schools. So we were able to remove computer labs at all the elementary schools because kids had devices. So that freed up 1 or 2 classrooms at a number of our elementary schools. So that helped us with some growth. However, moving forward, as you've seen in the last many presentations from the facilities master plans, where we are with our elementary demographics and just how the numbers are growing and the challenges that we have with space. So, the thought was either doing some homework and research on either finding land for a standalone preschool, or if there was a existing building that we can come in and retrofit to make it a preschool.
I know you had mentioned that before. The reason I asked the question, I've had several citizens ask, why are we doing a preschool? And I figured this was a good venue to ask.
Well, there's a
And
lot
put
of
it out there.
Absolutely, there's a lot of advantages to doing a preschool. One would be to have a preschool center where all of the preschool teachers and staff could work together versus having them, in 1 or 2s in all of our elementary schools. So this way, that would help, more collaboration, more staff for just the classrooms, but also all of your related service providers, your speech, OT, PT. Instead of them driving to every school, they would have one location for them. And then the third benefit would be we would gain, 1 or 2 classrooms in every elementary school, which would help us with space. So there's a number of positives that come from that.
The other issue is that we are seeing the demographics change in York County. And so where many of us, maybe around the table, paid to have our own children to go to preschool, maybe a private preschool, we're finding that there's a number of students and families that can't afford that. And so they're not being served by instruction during those critical years. And so there's been some discussion about how do we want to address that? Is that something that we need to take that on? Now, then the previous administration, governor administration, there was a push to expand preschool. There was going to be additional state and federal funding, but that never came to fruition. So we started doing a lot of work to plan that, and then we had to back off because the money was not there. But that is something that, we continue to look at, because the earlier we can get to those students, the better they'll be when they hit kindergarten, first grade.
Thank you.
Any other questions for this part? Okay.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bone. If you want to roll into the budget outlook.
Members of the board and Dr. Shandor, thank you for the opportunity to present the budget outlook this evening. Let me begin with just a review of our current budget calendar. So we've held our community budget forums, we've met with board members, we've received recommendations and suggestions from staff and community through the Community Let's Talk platform. And the leadership team will begin reviewing those requests and prioritizing those items later this week. On December 18th, the governor releases his budget update. On January 8th, the General Assembly convenes. And in February, the superintendent presents his proposed budget. And then crossover will also occur in the General Assembly. And this is where we'll get a first look at the General Assembly's priorities. In March, the school board approves the budget, and then the General Assembly completes its work. However, there's still work that's done with the veto session that'll bleed over into April. We do have an April 1 deadline to have our budget approved and submitted to the county. And then in May, or early May, the Board of Supervisors will approve the county budget. That includes funding for our operating budget and also for our capital improvements budget. And then hopefully, if the state can complete its work on time, then we will bring final changes to the board to incorporate any last minute or final changes in the state budget. We'll bring that to you at the end of May. Unfortunately, we haven't done that in the past couple of years because the state's had a problem ending things on time. But we look forward to maybe that changing this year. So let's talk a little bit about the operating revenue. This is really to understand the outlook, you really need to understand the revenue, because without the revenue, there's no new expenditures. Federal revenue is 10% of our budget. A lot of that revenue is dedicated and directed to specific grants. We have NOAA grants, we have Department of Defense grants, and those are specific programs. We do have title grants that are used to support instructional programs, but there's not a lot of flexibility in that federal funding. What we look for is county operations and state operations. And for the county, that represents about 32% of our budget. We've had some communications with the county regarding working number. Now, historically, we have a working number as we head into the budget season. This year is a little different. The county has indicated to us that funding is a little tight on their end going into this session. So we've been funded very well in the past couple of years, over $2 million a year, but we're going to see that we will not see the same kind of level of funding coming from the county at this point. So I'm going to focus tonight on the state funding. The state here is comprised of the blue chart and also the orange chart. That's the state basic aid and also the state sales tax. That represents about 56% of our overall funding. And so as K-12, we represent about 1/3 of the state's general fund budget. So it is important to look at what's happening in the state to really be prepared for any changes, whether it's increases or decreases in state funding. So these are just some economic highlights that came from FY24. The source of this information is from the Virginia Secretary of Finance's presentation to the money committees in August of this year. But what they reported is actual results for FY22 was historic revenue growth, and record job growth. General fund revenues, $1.5 billion higher than they were in FY23. And then here's something interesting. So in December of 2022 was the initial forecast for 2024. And so with that initial forecast, they're saying that revenues exceeded the initial forecast by $1.72 billion. In September of last year, the state updated the budget, and they also updated the forecast. And in that revision, actual revenues still exceeded the forecast by $1.17 billion. So the state's been very conservative in their estimates, and that's good because what we see now is reserve fund balance is at their highest at $7.4 billion, and it currently exceeds the 15% statutory cap. So all great for FY24. Now let's look and see what FY25 is showing us. So the source of this information comes from the monthly reports of revenue, and this is through the first 4 months, October. General fund revenues through October are $731 million, and that's ahead of the historic revenue that was received in FY24. Year-to-date revenues are ahead of the forecast by $403 million. All fantastic news. And what was projected to be a modest recession for FY25 has not materialized at all. So everything is still showing growth. So we're really excited. Hopefully the governor has incorporated a lot of this new revenue for K-12, and we'll find out here in the next couple of weeks. Now, I wanted to show you this because this is some other good news that we see here. So this is just a snippet of the state calculation tool. So when the governor releases his budget, the Department of Education releases this. This is just only the top part. There's like 45 different accounts that we see on this calc tool. But the thing I wanted to focus on is the average daily membership for 25 and 26. So the green arrow indicates what we based our budget on for this year, 12,966 students. And while we haven't started the 26 budget, the state was projecting, based on historical trends, our enrollment or average daily membership to be 13,026 for FY26. Now, where we see ourselves right now, if you look in 25, what's highlighted there in green is what our budget's based on, but where we're actually trending right now is at 13,062, so 96 students higher than what we originally budgeted. And this is the average through November. But what actually November shows us is actually 13,080 students. So we're actually higher, and we're projecting to trend higher throughout the remainder of the year, unless there's something significant that happens with enrollment, with the military in particular, that we're not aware of. But this is really, really good news. I see it as good news because what it means is people are moving to York County. And the reason why they moved to York County is because of the schools, and so we're seeing a lot of growth. Now, with enrollment comes a lot of challenges, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. But where we're at FY26 is 13,026, so we know we're gonna have to move that number northward. The challenge is find out where that number needs to fall as we prepare the 26 budget, and we'll do that over the next couple of months. So here's some of the budget challenges that we've identified. Continues staffing shortages in career and technical education, world languages, special education, and in particular, special education paraeducators. We're about 30 positions unfilled right now. And then we also still have a number of custodial positions. We've identified we need additional behavioral support resources, behavior analysts, and behavior technicians. Compensation, of course, is always a priority. We always want to give the highest compensation increase, but we also need to remain competitive with our surrounding school divisions. And then enrollment. The challenge with enrollment is, as Dr. Carroll mentioned last month in the facilities master plan presentation, is that we have some capacity issues. Where is the enrollment going to fall? One of the big challenges we always have is with kindergarten. We can look at the 5-year birth rates. We have data on that. We can kind of gives us an idea, but what it doesn't take into account, a lot of the move-ins and the military transition. So that's something that we always work through as a team in August as we're trying to check the numbers and registration. We try to get the parents and kids registered as early as we can so we can hire the number of teachers, because it's best to get the best of the teachers and not start the school without teachers. So also with enrollment, it's where they fall. You know, Dr. Carroll's data, or the county's data, is showing that the growth is occurring in the northern part of the county. And so some of our CIP projects to address some of that growth don't occur until later in years 28, 29, 30, 31. And so we'll have to continue to monitor that and see if that changes or drives a change in our CIP. And of course, also capital projects funding is a challenge because the county provides about 95% of our funding for capital projects, and they provide 32% of our funding for operating budget. So it's all coming from the same pot, and it's all about prioritizing those funds. And this is what I find enjoyable. It's a big puzzle. We have to prioritize and work with the board and figure out how we're going to solve our issues. So that's the presentation this evening. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
How does a 32% county contribution compare to years past?
Well, it's changed a little bit. It's actually gone up, and it's mainly because of the reduction in the federal funds. So we saw millions of dollars fall off in the ESSER funds, and because we saw that shift, loss in federal funds, state and local percentages went up.
Great presentation, thank you.
I have a question. The slide presentation isn't on the agenda. Is there any way that we could?
It's there now, I apologize, I put it on there, won't be.
Oh, okay. So I'd have to log out and log back in to see, okay. Because it was showing blank and the presentation wasn't there, and so I wanted to make sure that it.
Just click on it, it'll pop up.
It'll pop back up.
Any other,
there we go.
Mr. Pivich, you mentioned about construction costs. The economy is doing really well. I would expect that construction costs are going to continue based on what we're seeing. There's no indication that there's a slowdown in any locality, as you know. There's still using some ESSER dollars. Our HVAC dollars expire in December, and there are other school divisions that have gotten extensions on those. So they'll be spending money well into the new year, at least into the first quarter. So
The reason why I was asking, like, is it like Ms. Carroll was talking, Dr. Carroll was talking about, we have the annual agreements with certain companies that can do certain things for us. In budgeting, I'm noticing it's like between 8 to 13% on average that we put in, which is about correct in my experience of those things. But like, no, I was just trying to see, like, with ways that we might be able to save a little bit on those negotiation points and use some of the money that we put in the budget for the benefit of our students and our staff. But yeah.
Can I add one more topic related to the budget? And I apologize, throwing you sort of a curveball. If you can go to slides, I believe it was 6. There you go. So I forwarded an email to the board last week related to a VASS meeting, a Region 2 meeting. And my questions were really for VASS, is the Virginia Association of School Superintendents, if there was going to be discussion around the support cap this year. And Mr. Bowen can explain the support cap to you probably in less than 45 seconds. You ready? But he can. Go ahead. 2009, what happened?
So 2009 was the Great Recession, and there's a support cap, so many support positions based on the number of students. And the state just, in order to balance the budget, they were just arbitrarily changing numbers. There was no rhyme or reason. But what happened when they made those cuts, it shifted the responsibility of support positions largely on local government. And so we've seen 2 instances since 2010 where the state has partially restored some of the support cap funding. But we're still several $1 million short of the full restoration that goes back to 2009.
The reason why I bring that up, because part of this calc tool that we get, where I think you mentioned there were how many other 42 or 40?
Yes, about 45 different lines.
Yeah, different lines. So the 2 that stand out and impact us greatly are elementary assistant principals and special ed aides, correct?
Correct.
So, and I don't have the email in front of me. I should have prepared a little better. But for elementary assistant principals, we have 12. And we're funded from the state, it was 1.6 for a while. Now the number has jumped to
2.57.
It jumped to 2.57, but when you subtract the percentages for what
Yes. So this is
funding we actually receive.
So if you look here, the local composite index, so York County pays roughly 35.5% of the cost of education. So the state calculates what the cost is, and that's what the state's share is. It's actually the combination of the state and the local share. That's the total cost. We pay 35%, the state pays 65%. So for the 2.57 positions for APs that they fund us for, they pay only 65%. We pay 35%. So we have 12, they're funding us for 2.57, and they're only paying 65% of the 2.57.
So it's,
We're making up the difference.
And we're making up the difference.
so it's like 1.6, I think it
Yes.
was. So the state's funding us for 1.6 as elementary assistant principals, and local picks up the rest of them.
So we're paying the full price of 9.43 assistant principals and 35% of the other 2.57.
Yes.
So essentially, we're paying for everything.
Correct. So I think it's important that not only board members understand it, but I think the public and our staff need to understand how we're funded. So when the governor's budget is released, if it's, they'll come out and they'll say a 5% raise, 2.5 per year, or a 6% raise for the biennium, and it's 3 and 3, that's only for SOQ fund positions. So for us, and correct me if I'm wrong, we will only receive the additional raise percentage for 1.67. The
Right.
county has to find the money for the remaining 9 point whatever. So I think it's important for people to understand that, because when they say there's a raise for all state employees, we only receive the funding for SOQ funded positions. So for paraeducator or special education paras, again, I have the sticky sitting on my desk, I apologize. I want to say we're funded for 6.18. But we have how many total? 40 that are special ed paras? Or no, I'm sorry, it wasn't special ed, it was kindergarten paras. So we're funded 6.1 for kindergarten paras across the county, and we have 40. So again, the local is picking up a lot of this. So if they make that adjustment to just those two positions in the support cap, it would have a great impact on us if the state would do that.
So compared to 2008, before the great recession, like, what was the support cap? There was like, no, they reduced it, I understand that. Where it was, like, no, how far are we from where we used to
I
be?
don't have the exact number, but I can provide that to you.
Is it significant?
Well, I can say in dollars, it was about a $5 million adjustment just in 1 year. And they did it in 2 years. So I think overall it was probably $7 million is what York County lost just because of that one change in funding.
So that's why I was like, we as a board, we want to advocate up in Richmond and like, what can we do to bring this up?
That would be something to
issue.
put on our
Exactly.
list for advocacy.
That was actually a question that was brought before the governor last week at the SBMA training, Empower Ed. The governor actually came and spoke, and he took question and answers from the audience, and that was a hot topic that came up with that discussion. And so the question is out there, and they're recognizing that it's a problem.
I mean, the state needs to pay their fair share. It needs to be,
There you go.
I mean, they really do. I mean, when you think about local and state and how all of this is funded, I mean, locally, I feel like the county's been fair and we've made
Right.
really great progress with it. But that trend can't continue.
Right.
It's not going to continue. So there needs to be some adjustments to the SOQs. I mean, we just heard a presentation of how wealthy the state is and the money and all that's out there. So, of all the years to make that change, at least in my opinion.
And as I understood with the JLR study, they say composite index change would not make significant impact on our budget. It might slightly, but there's those standards that we were talking about will
So
make.
the local composite index can have a significant change. We've been fortunate, the past 4 bienniums, we've seen our LCI go down, which is great because that means that the burden of the cost shifts to the state. Now, what concerns me, this data lags 4 years. The county had a significant increase in property values this past spring. I don't know how that's going to compare to the rest of the state, but certainly that will have a significant impact in how our LCI will be recalculated, because property values are one of the metrics used, significant metrics used to determine that rate.
So the higher the value, the less money they give us. That's
Correct.
So I have a question for you, well, probably both of you. So York County, as the school division, we get a lot of accolades, a lot of awards and things like that. Do we ever get any additional money tied to any of these things? Because you would think like when a school division does well and it performs well, here's some incentive because you've done well. Is there any monetary attached to that?
Sounds like merit pay.
Yeah.
Like merit, like, hey, you do well, we want to reward you for good performance.
I think what would be an interesting item for citizens to look at and other elected officials in our area would be, if we're ranked third, we'll just throw that out there. If we're
Right.
ranked third in the state in the niche rankings, if you looked at the 2 school divisions ahead of us, look at their
Per pupil.
per pupil number.
Oh, yeah.
I think one of them is like upwards of 20-some
It's-
thousand.
It's
These are
double
Northern
us.
Virginia
It is.
schools.
Right, and I get their Northern Virginia schools, I understand that,
Mhm.
but it's dramatically
Right.
different for us and a number of other schools. So again, but no, you don't really get rewarded for awards. And you were gonna mention,
Well, I think that they do look favorably on the school division so that when there's competitive grant opportunities, we apply, and we have seemed to be very successful. Dr. Skinner and her staff
Yeah, we do
have
get a
done
lot
a
of grants.
fantastic job with that.
well, remember, a lot of those are DODEA grants. That are federal grants, not state grants.
Yeah.
So,
I think we should be rewarding successful performance.
I'm glad you feel that way, Ms. Cross. We all do. But I just felt like it was important to mention the calc tool and the SOQ so we can inform people in the county, as well as, I want to say, Mr. Bowen, we did put up a slide at one of our earlier meetings that showed where we fell.
Yeah.
Yes.
I can't remember if that was the joint meeting or.
We did the joint meeting.
Okay. We can certainly dust that one off and bring that back for another presentation at some point.
Because we were in the bottom third.
So we're really not getting much more money.
Unless,
We were doing more with less.
No, I know that, I'm
That's-
talking about like compared to 25, 26, like
yes,
barely any.
there's not much more there, but what will change that is the enrollment.
Yeah.
So we get about $6,500 per student. That, so for every student, we'll see that number change. For this year, based on what we're seeing right now, it's a little over 600,000, but I expect that number to grow before March 31st.
And if those two categories, the elementary assistant principal and the kindergarten paraeducators were, even moved up to half, if they were moved, I'm not saying pay for all, but pay for a little more than what we're getting right now.
What is the overall percentage of the SOQ positions that are funded? Because I had it in my mind at some point it was 58%.
We're about 50%. So when we talk about raises, when the state gives us funding for a raise, we have to come up with 50% of the money. Now, the positions are a little different because we're talking support positions. You really have to dive down and look at that data. And that's not something we typically do because we don't control that information. That's something we just try to advocate for the state to change. But yeah, that's something that the funding is the critical piece, and at 50%, that's a lot to have to fund for a raise. It's about $1.2 million for 1%.
That the state's paying for.
Yeah, that's, yeah.
Any other questions related to this presentation? Okay.
Thank you. Good. Thank you. Our last presentation, no, I'm sorry. How do you say your last name?
Nikolai.
Nicolaisen.
Yes.
All right, so our last presentation, we have Ms. Danielle Nicolaisen. She's the audit director at Brown Edwards and Company. She's going to present the results of our annual audit and our annual comprehensive financial report for fiscal year 2024. Thank you. Thank you for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you for allowing me to sit at this table and not stand at the podium. I appreciate it. So everyone should have a copy of the annual financial report. It's the annual comprehensive financial report. I'll refer to it as the ACFR. So this is the second year that Brown Edwards has worked with York Schools on the audit, and it was a really successful year. I just want to take this moment to thank Bill and his staff for essentially dealing with us for 6 months out of the year. They are very qualified, very helpful. They are really easy to work with, and so I just want to thank you and your team for working with us throughout the process. So today, my thought was to just give an overview of the audit process and then go over at a high level our results. So our audit starts in the spring, the May-June timeframe. We conduct interviews with management and staff. We do a walkthrough of financial reporting processes and reporting on internal controls. We perform a risk assessment based on changes that may have happened during the year, changes in new funding sources, changes in systems or new personnel. And during that timeframe, we also make our federal program audit determination and perform our sample selections. In July, we come out here for our interim compliance testing. We also perform testing required by the Virginia Retirement System, VRS. And then the bulk of the audit is performed in September, and we were able to finish up the first half of October this year. So it was a really more efficient process this year, having been the second year of working with the schools. And that's why I mentioned it's a 6-month process that they sort of tolerate our presence and questions and provide information to us. So our audit can sort of be broken down into 3 sub-audits. We audit the financial statements themselves, the dollar amounts. We perform a compliance audit, largely with state compliance. And then also we perform federal program audits. So the financial statement audit is sort of what you would expect out of testing of balances and transactions. We'll confirm amounts directly with funding sources. We will select samples of cash receipts and disbursements for receivables and revenues and payables and expenditures. We vouch capital asset additions. If there are any new debt issuances, we test that to make sure that's properly recorded. And there are also some pretty significant amounts embedded in the financial statements related to pension, self-insurance liabilities, and other post-employment benefits. These amounts are all actuarially determined. We are not actuaries, we do not claim to be, but in terms of our testing there, we sort of evaluate the actuaries that are engaged by the schools to make sure they're competent, they're properly certified, and just to make sure that the data that's being provided to them by the schools is accurate and complete. The second part of the audit is the state compliance audit, and so that is the state auditor of public accounts essentially put out an audit guide that has a lot of required testing procedures with state code, and also there's some departments in there that have some special requirements, Department of Education being one of them. So we do testing over sort of the budget and budget amendment process to make sure that's in compliance with state code. We also do testing over conflicts of interest, filings, procurement, and we also do some testing on the annual school report that's submitted to the state. We also issue a separate report for the Virginia retirement system to make sure that the data that's submitted to VRS is accurate and complete. We make sure that the contributions are made timely, and also that the amounts that are withheld from the employees' paychecks is being remitted timely and appropriately to the retirement system. And the third part is the federal program audit, and the schools unfortunately don't get credit for this in their Act for document. The audit we do over the federal programs is a combined audit with the county. We only issue 1 report, and that's issued with the county's document. But so for every federal program that's over a certain threshold, it's required to be audited every 3 years. And then there's a risk assessment process that's required, again, by federal guidelines to be performed annually in case something needs to be rotated in more soon or more frequently than that. This year, the combined federal program audit with the county, 2 of the programs selected for testing were directly related to the schools, was the Child Nutrition Program and the Education Stabilization Fund Program. The results of our federal program audit were clean. It was an unmodified opinion. Again, it's included in the county's Act for document. There were no findings over compliance or over internal controls over compliance. So again, not included here in this document, but want to definitely give credit to the schools for the clean audit opinion there. So in terms of the document that you have in front of you, it's not my intent to go over it in detail. There are a couple of things that I wanted to point out at a high level. So on the table of contents, you'll note that this document is broken out into 4 sections. There's an introductory section, a financial section, a statistical section, and a compliance section. So the introductory and statistical sections are unaudited. So that is outside the scope of our audit. We note that in our report, but it's trend information. The statistical section is largely operational. So just want to point out that that's not within the scope of our audit. So the financial section and the compliance section, you'll note that each one starts with an audit report, and that's from us. There is a portion of the financial section that's titled Management's Discussion and Analysis. This also is unaudited. However, we take a really good look at all of the financial figures that are included in that document and ensure that it's consistent with what we noted as part of our audit process. This section, the Financial Reporting Standards Board that puts out the guidance for how to put together this document thinks that this needs to be included in this section, and this is what's meant to be the high-level, user-friendly overview of this 200-page document. It's a really good explanation of the current year results of operations and how they changed and compared to last year. It's sort of the executive summary of the financial report.
Where is that again?
It's management's discussion and analysis. It starts on page 5A.
Got it. Thank you.
And again, this is written by management. We make sure that the numbers are consistent with what we audited, but again, the explanations are all provided by the finance team. So our first audit report is on, oh, that page number is not correct. Let's see. It's on page 1. It's not numbered because of the letterhead, but so this is our audit report on the basic financial statements. Our opinion is in the second paragraph. And in our opinion, the financial statements are presented fairly in all material respects. So this is a clean, unmodified audit opinion on the basic financial statements. It's essentially the highest level of assurance that you can receive outside of a public company audit. Below our opinion, we describe the basis for our opinions, the standards under which we conduct the audit. The report then goes on to describe management's responsibilities for the financial statements. These are management statements. And then it describes our responsibilities for the audit of the statements. It then goes on to describe the level of assurance that we provide over the different sections of supplementary information. And then the very last paragraph makes reference to that second compliance report. Again, not going over the financials in detail, however, I did want to point out note 1 to the financial statements. So we have it's laid out basic financial statements and then the footnotes to the financial statements, which is followed by all of the supplementary information. And the footnotes are meant to provide context and additional background to the numbers within the financial statements themselves. And so this note is probably the most important. It describes the reporting entity, the nature of all the funds and how they're reported within the document, as well as the significant accounting policies by area. Our second report is on page 101. So this is our audit report on internal control over financial reporting and also on compliance. And this is required for any audit that's performed in accordance with government auditing standards. The first section is our report on internal controls. If we had noted any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses throughout the course of our audit, we would describe those here. This is a clean report on internal control, so there's no deficiencies to report here. The next page is the report on compliance. Describes the results of our testing of compliance. As I mentioned before, this largely the state auditors list of audit requirements with the state code and the different agencies. This is, again, a clean report on compliance. The results of our testing disclose no instances of non-compliance to be reported here. So again, this is a clean government auditing standards report. Because we assist, there's also the stapled packet in front of you. I'm not going to go over that in detail, but because we assist with the preparation of this document, we do assist with some high-level journal entries, which are included in the back. Those are largely at the top level to prepare the document, non-impactful other than some reclassifications to the fund statements themselves. And they're related to things that were really just adjusted at year end anyways, the pension and the OPEB type liabilities that you actually don't receive the reports from the state until August, if you're lucky. And there were no past adjustments. So we have, because of our audit materiality thresholds, there are levels at which we can tolerate a misstatement within the statements, and there were none here. So anything that we had noted was adjusted, or we noted nothing at all. So it's, again, a clean report on financial statements themselves. Are there any questions?
You said at the end, you guys were doing this adjustment and entry?
Yes.
Or is it-
Yes, most of them, so it's a required communication to any time we do something as part of the financial statement preparation, just because for independence purposes, we want everybody to know that that's what we do. But if you look at the descriptions, and they're largely related to financial reporting or for financial statement preparation. And again, largely it's the way our system is built to be able to build on top of the fund statements into the full accrual government-wide statements.
Good job.
Any questions about the audit?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great,
Appreciate it.
thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak and to speak at this meeting.
Thank you for taking
I
that
appreciate
time.
it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. All right. We have a discussion now, some revisions to the student handbook and code of conduct.
Yes, we're gonna have Dr. Aaron Butler share with you. As you know, we changed you approved the cell phone policy last month. So we shared with you last month that we were gonna bring a few adaptations or modifications to this. So Dr. Butler is gonna share those with you now. Dr. Butler.
Thank you, Dr. Madam Chair, members of the board, Dr. Shandor. As Dr. Shandor had shared, policy JFCF was adopted by the board back in November, and it is in response to the Governor's Executive Order 33 for cell phone-free education. There's two areas in the student handbook which had to be adjusted to align with the new adopted policy, and that is for our school buses. So there was language that was added here, and you see a red line that's also on board docs, where we had to delineate that elementary and middle school students were not allowed to use cell phones on school buses unless they were given specific permission from a teacher, coach, club sponsor, or administrator. And then for our high school students, they are allowed to use it as long as they're abiding by the guidelines which are in the AUP, also the policy and our student code of conduct. The other area that we did have to adjust as well, which is, let's scroll down. I'll pass it, I'm sorry. There we go. There was also on buses, there was another area. There was a section that talked about the use of iPads, laptops, and electronic devices, and so we had to also make sure that was in alignment with the new language that was adopted. There is one additional section in the handbook which, in our student health and safety section, there is one provision that was put into the executive order, and it was also added to the policy that was adopted, and that is for exemptions. So our policy is that from bell to bell, there's a prohibition against using cell phones by students. However, if there is a specific medical reason, students do have the option to submit in writing if there's something for their IEP or a Section 504 medical plan. And that will be supervised by our coordinator of health services, Alicia Hutchison, myself, or the superintendent's designee to provide guidance to our schools. And those should be submitted, as it says in policy, to the school nurse if there's any questions about this.
Is that for example, I know some people who have diabetes, they have the insert and they use their phone to check the blood sugar level.
Yes, ma'am. That would be one of those exceptions. And that was one of the things that came up when Dr. Carroll had his committee, and he can share, that was one of the things that did come up during that committee.
Yeah, that was the very first concern that came up, excuse me, and they, so in this situation, they would approve that exemption, however, only for that use. And then if a student was to use the phone for any other use, they would still be subject to the code of conduct.
And so those are the two revisions we have to make, and of course, under policy CZ student handbook. Normally, I would annually bring this to the board in the spring so we could adopt it, but this is a change that we had to make to align with policy.
And so that'll appear in the consent agenda at the regular meeting.
Are there any questions or? Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Butler. All right, well, that concludes our work session. Thanks to everybody who presented this evening. We're gonna now take a break. The regular meeting begins upstairs at 7 p.m. in New York. This meeting is adjourned.
2000s, you remember when you used to have to bring your own technology?
Yeah.
So just gonna carry it. Are we picking these laptops up? Or they're
Yes,
gonna
please.
okay, so we don't have to